So, what are the chances of two Trump foes getting audited by the IRS? Well, it's about 1 in 82 million, according to a New York Times calculation. That's exactly what happened to former FBI Director James Comey and his deputy, who replaced him when Comey was fired, Andrew McCabe, until McCabe was fired by Donald Trump, because he was the acting FBI director for a few months. Both were fired, of course, by Trump during the Russia investigation into the 2016 campaign. The New York Times reports that the audits took place under Trump-appointed IRS Commissioner Charles Reddick, who is still in the job. The IRS is denying any wrongdoing. Reddick saying he has nothing to do with individual audits. That's done by career bureaucrats. Comey and his wife's audit started in November of 2019, costing them nearly $5,000 in accountant fees. Comey at one point had to send the IRS the family's Christmas card to prove how many children he had as dependents. McCabe's audit began in October of 2021, months after Trump left office. McCabe reacted to the reporting on CNN earlier today.
We're talking about a coincidence that really is almost impossible statistically. It wasn't until I found out about Jim Comey's audit that I started wondering that this can't possibly be random.
So joining us now is Chuck Rosenberg, MSNBC contributor and a former senior FBI official and U.S. attorney, and New York Times chief White House correspondent Peter Baker and former RNC chairman Michael Steele. Chuck, I don't know if you've ever had that kind of intensive audit. They say it's very rare, and for these two men, both of whom had the same job and both were on Trump's enemy list, to both be audited is a 1 in 82 million probability, according to the New York Times. What say you?
So, well, I haven't had the pleasure of an IRS audit, perhaps something to look forward to, Andrea. The statistics tell you that this is highly, highly unusual. The statistics don't tell you that it's improper, right? I mean, Michael Steele could win the lottery. It's extremely unlikely that he'll do that. He could also win the lottery twice. That's an infinitesimally small chance. But winning it twice has happened, and it's statistically possible. So the only real answer I think I have right now is highly unusual statistically and mathematically, and we should turn it over to the Treasury Inspector General and let that person figure it out. We don't know. Right now it would be conjecture, but the math looks daunting.
Peter Baker, this New York Times report by your colleague, Michael Schmidt, is certainly alarming, and it's certainly resonant of things that many people experienced during the Nixon years, when there was definitely an enemies list and people were audited on orders of the White House.
Yeah, I think, look, Chuck is right that there's no evidence in the story that Mike Schmidt was able to publish that suggests definitively that this was done as an act of retaliation, other than the circumstantial evidence of the numbers, which are very, very daunting. However, I think that you have to take into context President Trump's very, very clear messages throughout his presidency that he wanted to use the apparatus of government to punish his enemies. Repeatedly, he called on the Justice Department to prosecute people he didn't like, including James Comey and Andrew McCabe. Repeatedly, he sought to use the power of his presidency to take action against those he didn't like politically. He tried, in fact, I think, to strip security clearances from Jim Comey and Jim Clapper, another former intelligence director, I think John Brennan, the former CIA director, not because they had done anything wrong, but because they criticized him and he didn't like them as a result of that. And therefore, he wanted to use his power to take away their security clearance. So in other words, he showed again and again a willingness to do things other presidents didn't do or wouldn't have done, or at least would have been embarrassed to have been caught doing.
He certainly never considered that there was a firewall between him and the Justice Department, which traditionally was the case in another parallel instance. Michael Steele, can something like this hurt the credibility of the IRS with Americans? Not exactly a beloved agency.
Yeah, Andrea, I was going to say, I don't think there's a whole lot of love between the American people and the IRS. So I think most Americans would chalk this up like, see, I told you. I think Chuck has got it right in terms of how the statistics play out here. I'd like that idea of hitting the lottery twice. We're working on that. But the reality remains that this reeks more of politics than anything else, particularly considering that the IRS's own public pronouncements, particularly during and after COVID, was how overwhelmed they were, how far behind they were on audits. Audits were not a priority for the IRS because they had a shortfall of personnel to do the regular processing of taxes and tax returns. So it does smell a little bit funny to me. But, I'm not going to keep all the political hats on this. I'll give a nod to the idea of chance and probability and the reality that something was triggered the audit, but it's just kind of weird that both men triggered it approximately the same time, coming out of an administration in which they were not liked by the president. And so I think that it smells a little bit funny from where I'm sitting.
And Chuck, I want to switch gears and ask you about the January 6th committee, because they're questioning former Trump White House counsel Pat Cipollone tomorrow behind closed doors. But how important do you think his testimony could be from what we know from previous hearings about the central role that he was playing on a lot of these critical issues regarding January 6th?
Well, generally, Andrea, anybody who was with the president, speaking to the president, understood what the president understood, might be able to shed some light on what it is the president intended. I thought Cassidy Hutchinson the other day was a very compelling witness, but a lot of her information was secondhand. And so when you're talking to people who have firsthand information, what the president saw, knew, said, understood, those can be very important witnesses. I would never predicate a federal prosecution on one witness alone. You would want to talk to as many people who were around the president, like Pat Cipollone, as you possibly could, because only then do you begin to draw a picture of what the president intended. I would also add one other caveat. We have seen only a tiny percentage of what the committee has uncovered. If they've interviewed 1,000 people and they've spent 4 or 5 hours with each one, that's 4,000 or 5,000 hours of deposition testimony. We've seen about 10 or 12 hours. So you have to be careful. And as a prosecutor you would want to see everything, understand everything, see all the depositions, to talk to all the key witnesses before you made any decision.
And just give us a refresher, as an attorney, it was the White House counsel, which means that his client was the office of the presidency, not President Trump. But certain things would be privileged, but he can assert privilege in answer to a specific question and still continue with the deposition.
Well, you got it exactly right, Andrea. You don't need me as an attorney, right? So Mr. Cipollone, as White House counsel, represented the office of the president. Executive privilege is a real thing. It does exist. And certain questions and certain answers might call for privileged information. But if both sides are acting in good faith, the committee and Mr. Cipollone, they can navigate that. They can find a path through that. There's a bunch of things that he might have seen that have no implications for executive privilege. There are other people with whom he might have spoken that wouldn't hold a privilege. And so, again, there's a path here. If both sides are acting in good faith, there's a lot that Mr. Cipollone can testify to.
Chuck Rosenberg, Peter Baker, and Michael Steele. And if you do win the lottery twice, remember your friends.
Oh, yeah.
Like right here. Thanks to all.